Hi Spooky Scholars, Professor Nemo here, and welcome back to Screamology. If it's your first time here with me in class, welcome! Welcome to your masterclass in horror, where we dive deep into the horror genre through expert insights and movie analysis. If you've been in class before, welcome back. Good to see you again. Today's episode, I will be talking with Professor Murray Leeder. We're going to be talking all things color theory in film, especially horror films. The two movies that we're going to be talking about today in relation to color theory are The Masque of the Red Death and also the original Suspiria. Both films are heavy in color and color is very important to both of these films, so it's going to go along with what Murray and I are talking about. We're going to be talking about color psychology a little bit and what colors mean to us, and basically a big part of it is actually a cultural thing, so we're kind of going to be focused more on Western thought and what color psychology means in Western thought, but we will have a couple mentions of how color psychology differs in a couple different cultures, so look out for that. It's going to be a really awesome talk. I hope you guys love it. It's kind of long, this one, but there's just a lot to talk about, so that's kind of why. But I'm very excited to bring you my chat with Murray Leeder. So let's get into it. Let's talk color psychology. Here's my chat with Professor Murray Leeder. Welcome everybody to our next episode. We're going to be talking about color theory and color use in horror movies. And so I just wanted to introduce my guest today. His name is Murray Leeder. He's an assistant lecturer in film in English at the University of Alberta, and he's also the author of Horror Film, A Critical Introduction, The Modern Supernatural and the Beginnings of Cinema, and he has also edited a number of books on the subject as well. So Murray, thank you so much for being here and joining on the podcast today. I'm looking forward to chatting with you about all things color theory and especially in regards to horror films.
Thanks.
So welcome.
Thanks very much for inviting me.
Yeah, of course. Very excited to talk about color theory, and I've read that chapter from your book. Today we're going to be talking about two films that you mentioned in your book, which are Suspiria and The Masque of the Red Death. So we're not going to be going in complete spoiler territory on plot points or anything. It's mostly going to focus on color theory, but I'm sure some things will be said about the movies. So I guess spoiler alert for everybody. All right, so before anything, let's get to know our guest a little bit better, and these are the questions that I pretty much ask everybody. So, first off, one of the more important questions is, what is your relationship with horror? Why do you like it, and what really got you into it?
Yeah, I think as a child, the idea of the monster appealed to me. I was one of those kids who was into Godzilla and stuff like that. And there are various books that I got from the library. I think people from a certain generation remember a series of children's books with these garish orange colors, or orange covers rather, which fits with the color thing, written by somebody named Ian Thorne, although I guess that was a pseudonym. And there was one about Dracula, and there's one about Frankenstein and the Mummy and things like this. And I'd love to get my hands on these books, but they're high-priced rarities now. And I think those really
Of course,
helped
yeah.
orient me. The pictures in them, they made me want to see these movies. So I got very interested in classical horror when I was young, and then slowly kind of became aware of more modern horror as well. And I started writing horror, and I was a novelist writing mostly fantasy novels for a time when I was younger. It's kind of got me through undergrad anyway. And it's been a long time since I've written much fiction, but I find that writing nonfiction, academic writing scratches the same itch basically. Yeah, yeah. And I guess by maybe my mid-teens, horror was something, uh, and it was always sort of an intellectual interest as much as anything, and the idea that I gotta see all that's out there, right? I've got to
Mm-hmm.
kind of catalog like a amateur historian uh,
Yeah.
the genre. And so eventually, when I studied film studies, I did some stuff on horror in my undergrad, and then when I did my master's in film studies, I did a project on haunted house movies, and sort of continued on from there, and have picked up various projects here and there based on what interests me and what's going on.
Perfect. Yeah, I kind of feel the same way that I of course have always like loved horror movies, but I like diving deeper into them eventually. Like originally obviously I started as a teenager, kind of just like, "Oh my God, it's so fun to be scared and watch them with my friends." But then my whole life I've always kind of academic sort of, and I like knowing more about everything. I always love like learning. So some of my friends are like, "I just like getting scared. I don't really care about what's underneath," but it fascinates me. And when I started learning that there's so much more underneath than just jump scares and stuff, I was like, oh, yay. That makes me more interested in it.
Yeah, the funny thing is, I'm not sure that horror films ever scared me that much. And
Yeah.
maybe that's because I always had like a layer of intellectual distance between myself and the material. But that's
Right.
never
That
been.
makes sense.
And if a horror film does scare me, I'm impressed, you know.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
but that's I don't think the visceral appeal of the genre has ever been like the main thing that interests me.
Yeah, definitely. I could see that. I think after seeing so many, obviously I might get startled by like a jump scare or something, but I don't have the like, oh, I'm gonna have a nightmare later kind of thing. My mom is like that when I'm like, let's watch a scary movie. And she's like, I'm gonna be so scared later. As soon as the movie's done, I'm not even really thinking about, the scary images or anything like that.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it's because I've seen so many.
I think so. I mean, you do get jaded and just desensitized in a sense after a while. I remember when a Serbian film was playing in the theaters, a friend and I went at a independent theater in Ottawa, and at the desk they were like, "Do you know what this movie is about?" Apparently, they're
Yeah.
asking everyone, and we're like, "Yeah, yeah." And like on the way out, I remember saying to my friend, "It's like that honestly wasn't as extreme as I had expected," and I feel like I
Yeah.
might be the only person to have ever had that reaction.
Right, I know a lot of people are like, "Oh my God, that film." And I'm like, I guess like you said, just my tolerance for things is a lot higher than most people.
Hmm.
All right, so the next question, which I think is kind of like the most important question I ever ask anybody, is what's your favorite horror film?
So I've
Which is a hard
developed this.
question.
It is a hard question, but I've gotten it so many times that I've developed a stock answer. Whether it's
Great.
correct or not, my stock answer is Dead of Night from
Okay.
1945, the British anthology film. And I think that part of it is that I love teaching this film because it pierces through people's defenses.
Okay.
That particularly the last segment, the one with the ventriloquist dummy, uh, it disturbs people so much in a way that they wouldn't have thought a film from the 40s, which has had this sort of quaint Britishness to it throughout most of it, that somehow all that's out the window, and it's like, oh my God, this is like legitimately terrifying.
Maxwell, I don't think I feel like singing. Come, come, Hugo. Mustn't disappoint your public. Just a bird in a gilded cage, that's me. Ah, to hell with it. Oh, come on now. You ready?
And
Yeah.
it's a really fascinating film in the way that it mixes kind of coziness and horror. And it's one that I can return to anytime and love to teach. So that's my stock answer.
Great. I actually haven't seen it, but I will add it to my very long to watch list. But I think it's interesting because I've mainly started, watching like modern things. And then as I started thinking about doing the podcast, and there's like another podcast that I listen to called Evolution of Horror, and he kind of goes over like there's all kinds of different eras that, he'll review. And so I started watching a lot of older films, and when I was younger, I was like, oh, the old ones probably aren't scary. I don't want to watch it. So I wouldn't watch originals of a lot of things that have been remade. But now I've gone back to watch originals, and I've been watching stuff from like the 30s, 40s, 50s. And I was like, man, these ones, since they don't rely on a lot of, CGI and things that a lot of stuff now uses to scare you, they're actually making you feel scared by environment and atmosphere and just the
Hmm.
actual story itself. And I was just like, man, I missed out on so many things by kind of thinking that I wasn't going to get, scared by these movies. So I do think old stuff can also be just as good when it comes to horror for sure.
Yeah, I had like the opposite trajectory. I kind of worked my way up, but, although there's still plenty of catching up even now, but worked my way up through classical horror and silent horror to a small extent. Uh,
Yeah,
but most of it was very hard to get a hold of in the 90s. There were only so many
right,
films that were out there. And I remember sort of I would get to I have books where it's like the section on the 70s I wouldn't even read.
right.
That I had like a firm cutoff in the 60s that I only eventually began to get past when I was maybe 14 or 15.
That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, 'cause I remember I guess probably as a teenager I watched a remake of 13 Ghosts and I watched like Amityville Horror 'cause I think that was I guess early 2000s like late 90s where there was like a big resurgence of like remaking everything that was older.
Hmm.
And so I watched all those remakes and then only recently did I actually watch a lot of the originals. And I was just like, "Man, I kind of like the originals better on most of these." So, yeah. It's kind of
13 Ghosts
crazy.
is a weird one because the remake is its tone doesn't come close to the original film. It's like
Oh yeah, it's so
completely
different.
different.
Yeah, when I watched the original, I was like, oh my gosh, how did they get the remake even out of this original story? Like, I get very small glimpses of the original, but
Yeah.
mostly not. And then another question I have for you, it kind of relates to the other one, but do you have a favorite horror icon person? I guess out of like the popular ones that most people go with.
I guess I would probably be unimaginative and say Dracula. That I'm most interested in pursuing the permutations of Dracula throughout the throughout the ages. I'm always interested when there's a new Dracula coming out. So I guess that's what I'd say. It feels like a stodgy answer or something like that, but I think that's my answer
That's
all the
okay.
same.
It's kind of a hard question, I think. I would say out of the older stuff, I really like Frankenstein, but out of, I guess, kind of like the modern type of movies, my favorite is Ghostface. So I
Hmm.
usually, that's what I stick with when I get that question too. Um, but yeah,
Well,
it's hard because I do like a lot of characters. It's hard to pick
mhm.
one.
I would say, like, as far as Halloween goes, having written a book about Halloween, I take a
Right.
special interest in that franchise. I don't know if it's
Definitely.
necessarily my favorite. It definitely has its ups and downs. Although I tend to defend
Yeah.
even the weaker ones on some level. I don't think any of them are outright, unwatchably terrible.
Right.
Uh, and there are many franchises that I think do have lower lows anyway.
Yeah.
So of the sort of post-classical, let's say, horror franchises, Halloween, I don't know that it's necessarily the best uh, overall, but it's definitely the one that interests me the most.
Definitely. I actually have a really hard time picking between Michael Myers and Ghostface for sure. Because my husband's really into Michael Myers. Like anytime he dresses up for Halloween, he's Michael Myers. So, except for
Mhm.
last year, I forced him to be Gomez Adams because we did a whole family thing. We were the whole Adams family. So I was like, I know you're usually Michael, but this year you're not gonna be. Just so you know.
Well, there's a
But
kind of straightforwardness to Michael.
yeah,
It feels to me. It's kind of no frills, you know. Uh,
yeah.
his whole thing is very simple.
Oh yeah, exactly. And I do think I agree with you that 'cause I'm a very much completionist when it comes to like especially franchises. I for the most part enjoy like almost every Halloween that I've watched. So that's pretty impressive considering, as you said, some of the franchises are very not so much. I went through Texas Chainsaw Massacre like last month and I think there was only maybe two or three that I was like, oh, this was entertaining and I liked watching it. And
Hmm.
some of the other ones I was like, why did I even put myself through this?
That is
Um
a weird franchise,
it
which
is.
hasn't had like, which like aside from the first two, has not had like consistent creative personnel for even two
Yeah.
consecutive films. I don't think
Yeah,
it's
pretty much I
very
think two
weird.
is like the longest.
Hmm.
Yeah, so that one, I do really love the original. And I really thought the second one was so separately different from the original. I was actually surprised that it was Toby Hooper for both.
I know, I
um,
know. I watched it just a
I
few
was like,
months
wow.
ago, and for the first time probably in 20 years, and it's like this film is so wild. Its
Yeah,
tone is
it's so different.
completely unlike the first film, but there's
Yeah.
a lot to like about it. It has one of the better
Oh
final
yeah.
girls in Stretch for sure, and
Oh yeah.
I was teaching a horror class in that the crotch scene
Yeah.
with the chainsaw. I had to show this in class because like you got to see this to believe it.
It's yeah.
Describing this
I know.
wouldn't do justice to it at all.
Oh yeah, especially if you like say if you hypothetically had only seen the first one and then you're trying to explain the second one, people would be like, "What are you talking about?" It's like totally
Hmm.
different. But yeah, so I do think having a decently good franchise run is very impressive considering uh sequels sometimes are just not that great.
Well, that's true. That's definitely true.
Yeah. Um Actually, I have a question for you about that since you do like Halloween. It's kind of a divisive question is do you like the Rob Zombie versions? I personally like them. Not a lot of people do. So I just like am curious other people's opinions on that.
I would I don't know that I would go with like uh they I kind of let's say appreciate them. I don't begrudge their existence. I
Right.
I don't find watching his films a very pleasant experience. There's something about his
Yeah.
sensibility that just doesn't quite work with me, let's say. But I would prefer his Halloween 2 to the first one because it just feels like it's more his. And it's
Right.
just like it's not beholden to being a Halloween film particularly. It's just doing
Yes.
whatever Rob Zombie thinks, and I think that overall
Right.
works a bit better.
I think he has such a very unique style to him that by trying to be something else, it just doesn't mesh well, I guess.
Hmm.
What's your favorite subgenre if you could pick one, or maybe two if it was too hard to pick one?
Yeah, I think that I would have to say haunted house movies, maybe ghost movies more broadly.
Yeah,
That's kind of historically where most of my research interests have lied, although I've wandered out of that many times. But
right.
it's probably the area that most interests me. And I don't know. I'm almost reluctant to say that insofar as that feels like a kind of respectable corner of horror. That those are generally not very gory films. They're generally,
Right,
more family-friendly films, and that's not their reason.
right.
I just like the emphasis on atmosphere, and I generally like ghosts and stories where there's sort of a mystery about the past and how it's, affecting the present through this idea of haunting. So haunted house movies, and it feels like they're hard to do. You know,
Yeah,
when somebody sits down, they want to dash something off. It's rarely a haunted house movie because those
right.
require a lot of skill in building atmosphere because not a lot happens in them. They're not like plot
Yeah,
heavy movies, and you can't fall back on like familiar set pieces all that much
right.
without it becoming really stodgy. So I guess that's
Yeah.
probably my answer.
Okay. I know I didn't ask you this previously to come up with, but out of curiosity, do you have a favorite haunted house movie?
Well, I guess I would have to probably say The Haunting again, a deeply conventional answer, but the version of The Haunting from the early '60s, which is a very faithful adaptation of Shirley Jackson's wonderful novel. That would be my probably my favorite, but I could also make a good case for The Innocents as well,
Okay.
and The Uninvited from back in the '40s, and of course The Changeling is wonderful, and you got to mention The Shining, and but they're for some reason they're often films with the and
Right.
uh, then a single word afterwards. Yeah.
That is actually true. I think I've seen I think all of those and I'd have to say the original Haunting for sure. That's probably my favorite as well. And I also really like the others.
The others, yeah.
Some people say that they could see the twist coming, but for me, at least the first time I watched it, I literally had no idea that was going to be the
Yeah, I don't
twist. I
think I
was
did
totally
either.
taken aback.
I felt like it was well done. Even coming a couple of years after The Sixth Sense, it's like, oh, I should have been ready for this. And no,
Right,
somehow not.
exactly. Exactly. Because I guess I was pretty young when I watched The Sixth Sense the first time, so I actually totally didn't see that coming either.
I probably saw The Sixth Sense under the optimum circumstances because I saw it the first day it came out,
Oh,
and there
amazing.
wasn't talk about the big twist or anything like that. So I was just kind of enjoying it as a movie. I wasn't really thinking about, oh, what's the twist going to be? So
Right.
it did surprise me. So, uh, uh, but then very quickly, I feel like the advertising changed to, do you know the twist?
Right. Are you going to figure it out? Then the whole movie you're trying to figure it out
Yeah.
instead of like being surprised. Plus, I think even that, like you said, I think that would be the optimum time because now in like pop culture and just like even if you miraculously, I guess unless you're a teenager, but you haven't seen the movie yet, like probably at least you know there's a twist, you know it's M. Night, it's probably a twist.
Yeah,
So I
exactly.
feel like that ruins it. All right. So yeah, we'll talk about color theory, color usage in film and horror films, and that way we'll have like a little bit of a baseline. I'm sure you know about it, I know about it, but for the
Hmm.
audience, so before we kind of go into the films a little bit, and myself, I'm definitely like interested in color theory because since I'm working on my bachelor's in illustration, done a lot of color study and all that, and so when I was learning about color in film in the class, I was like, oh my God, this is so interesting. Then as I'm watching all my horror movies, I'm literally like thinking about that stuff, which I didn't think about it before because I think if you never really studied color theory or anything, you just don't think about that when you're watching a movie. And I thought it was interesting how like certain colors and color choices really affect you almost on a subconscious level that you don't even realize as you're like enjoying the films.
Hmm.
Unless the films are very color heavy, which like the ones we're going to talk about, you definitely kind of come to realize there's a reason why there's the colors in the film. But and so I was going to ask you, what made you interested in studying about the colors in horror films?
Well, I honestly don't quite remember the moment. Basically, when I was pitching a horror film, a critical introduction, there was a format that they wanted me to follow. About they wanted like a history of the genre in 3 chapters, and then kind of major theoretical approaches, and then the last 3 chapters are supposed to be some sort of extended study of something. So I kind of rattled around like, okay, what could that be in my case? And I think that at the time, my PhD supervisor, who just retired, Charles O'Brien, was writing about silent era color, about like the 3 Technicolor color methods. And I think that my conversations with him about that kind of cross fertilized into my thinking, well, I haven't really encountered much about color in horror. So I thought, well, maybe we could do a horror aesthetics kind of approach, and color could be a chapter in that. So it ended up being sound, color, and then digital aesthetics. And between you and me, color was the one I was happiest with. This is the chapter that I think turned out the most well and was the most novel. You know, uh, uh, because little had been written about this so far. There was a really interesting article that I cite in there by Alan Cameron, a scholar from somewhere in the southern hemisphere, Australia, I want to say, maybe New Zealand.
Hmm.
But there wasn't a ton to build on, so I thought that was an interesting approach. And I think Charles, my supervisor, recommended the book Chromophobia by David Batchelor, which is a very strange book, but it's a
Yeah.
kind of history of color and the way society is kind of Western society anyway, kind of distrusts color as a concept and wants to contain color, but how color contains subversive potential. And I thought this is just a natural thing to apply to horror. And films like Suspiria and like Mask of the Red Death just came right to my mind as
Perfect.
candidates to talk about. I was also really interested in color inserts. So to speak of things like 13 Ghosts, films which are largely in black and white but have color sequences, and that you find those in many different genres. Admittedly, that's kind of a staple of art films. I think of Ivan the Terrible or Cleo from 5 to 7. But I realize a lot of horror films do that. Sometimes just very fleetingly, like in Return of Dracula, just the stating of Dracula is in color, for example. So
Right, right,
it,
right.
it becomes a sort of almost puncturing moment of a different aesthetic, and red is often the color which punctures that way. So these were kind of the
Mhm.
insights which took me into that area of study.
Perfect. That's amazing. And I do agree. I think the color inserts are interesting and about how sometimes color can alert you to something changing or something like that. So, sometimes if you see a certain color at a certain moment or like throughout the story, if you see that one certain color, it could mean, something's changing or I know we're talking about color, but with sound, especially in horror and
Hmm.
even in Suspiria, especially, I noticed, like when the uh, little theme comes in, it's kind of like, okay, something's
Yeah.
happening or it's about to happen, and some same with the color in the movie, and I think I go into a tiny bit when I talk about red, which is mainly in horror. But in it, I don't know why I was blanking, but in it, obviously, a red balloon comes in here
Hmm.
and there, and you're kind of like, okay, he's gonna be here soon.
Yeah.
And so, with color theory, basically one of the things that makes me so interested in it is kind of the psychology behind it and how, like, certain colors make you feel certain things. And another thing that to note about that I was that uh, the color theory actually can change between cultures because, certain colors mean different things in different cultures. So, mainly, obviously, we're going to talk about like Western thinking with color psychology, but just as a note for the audience that depending on like the culture you're from, some of the psychology behind it might actually be different.
Yeah, and an obvious
Um,
example is white in China and Japan, being
right,
associated with death because of funerary traditions. So uh, this comes into J horror, for example, with all these characters in white. Ghosts are
right.
conventionally dressed in white, and it has a sort of different coding. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that's actually one of the big examples that I learned about that I was like, oh man, just not being in that culture myself, I would have never even known that. Especially within Western, they kind of say like white is kind of like innocence and purity and stuff. And so it's
Hmm.
very black and white, literally.
Yeah.
And then so yeah, I'm just gonna go over like briefly some of the associations that we have with color. The other thing I think is interesting about that, especially with the colors changing with culture, is that it's almost like the associations that you get with certain colors, some of the associations are kind of a man-made thing of why we're, reacting to it that way. Whereas there's certain colors and certain things that go with them that it's more like a natural reaction no matter what. Especially
Hmm.
like with red and anger and stuff like that. It's like no matter where you're from, you're probably gonna get that reaction from the color. But I always thought it was so interesting that certain things that we associate are actually kind of like a man-made association. It's not even a natural one. I'm just gonna go in like kind of rainbow order, I guess. I thought it would just be
Yeah.
the easiest way to do it. But starting with red, which works best with horror anyways. Basically, it's very tied to horror, rightly so. Something that's really interesting about red is that it's actually like this big range of emotions that you can feel with it because on the one hand, you could feel like love and power and passion, but also it could make us feel like anger or danger, and obviously the biggest association in horror movies is like blood, and
Hmm.
violence. But I just think it's so interesting how it could be love or violence, like within one color. And I guess in that sense, having the color in, say, a film is very tied to the context of which we're seeing the color.
Yeah.
But
Hmm.
so in film, we notice that red commands our attention more in the frame, which we kind of talked about a little bit already. And so in film, it could typically lead us to these feelings, which is war, danger, strength, power, passion, desire, and love. And then as we apply that specifically to horror movies, we get a little bit deeper, like in our analysis of the color. And so what I kind of came up with is like the two most obvious that we see in horror movies is danger and blood. But in horror, it sometimes can be subtle too. And in that regard, rather than just anger, horror red can escalate to rage instead of just anger. It's like rage or like aggression instead of just being mad about something. So basically it can elevate pure danger to evil status, which we see a lot in satanic type of movies and demon possessions and stuff like that. And then I tried to come up with some horror movie examples, which is hard because it feels like every movie has red, but obviously Suspiria, there's a lot of red, which we're going to talk about today. Mask of the Red Death as well. And then a good example I thought was like The Shining with the blood in the elevators, and there's lots of red. Right?
And the
Car keeps
bathroom in
falling
The
out.
Shining. I
Yes,
think it's a
yeah, the
good example of
bathroom.
how in horror, the presence of any red is likely to suggest blood,
Right, exactly.
which may not be
Um,
true in every genre in the same way.
exactly. Yeah. And then that was the other one I was thinking of, The Sixth Sense. So I guess I didn't notice it really when I was watching it, but I was reading that um anytime a ghost is there or like about to appear, there's red in the frame. So I guess there's the time when the balloon is floating up, and then I think there's the red doorknob, and I think a couple instances where someone's like wearing red. Um, and then obviously Carrie, and in that one it's very obviously blood. But the movie Us with the red jumpsuits, and then Nightmare on Elm Street. Obviously he has red in his sweater, but his boiler room is red, and usually in those scenes. So definitely just some good suggestions for anyone. I'm sure most of us have seen most of those, but if you haven't, they're all really good movies to watch, and to watch out for the red. And it obviously, but so you have any thoughts? And I guess we kind of talked about red, so we kind of heard your thoughts. If there's any other stuff you think about with red, or any other movies that you have suggestions for.
Yeah, well, the Del Toro film Crimson Peak is an interesting one because that's a haunted house movie where red is the
Right.
dominant symbol as well. This red earth, which isn't blood, but it kind
Right.
of suggests a blood-soaked land and history and everything else. Um, and I must say, for all the books about horror downstairs, I'm sure two-thirds of them have red covers. In fact,
Yeah.
that's something I want to like put a nix on from now on. It's like it just looks too samey. Let's use some different colors. Let's, well, I don't know, try out
Right.
green or something like that. But one of my favorites is in the vampire film Daughters of Darkness, Belgian film, and it may contain horror's only Death by Punch Bowl, where this guy gets killed with the shards of a shattered punch bowl, and the two vampires feast on his blood. And then, as they're kind of rapturously taking in the substance, then the whole film fades to red. So it's redness on the place that we usually find blackness. Like usually a film will fade to black, or occasionally white. So there's
Okay.
something novel innately about this fade to red instead. Although, in fact, Bergman would do something different, something similar rather in Cries and Whispers a few years later. I always wondered if he was influenced by Daughters of Darkness.
I mean, you would think maybe, since like you said, it's very not often that you see that, so
Hmm.
could be. So yeah, great suggestions. I have not seen either, so I will put them on my list. Because I'm always just looking for new, interesting things as I go through. Obviously, all the well-known stuff. I like not as well-known stuff as well, because there's so many good things that like
Hmm.
no one knows about. So I'm always looking for interesting stuff. So let's move on to orange. And so, like the usual color psychology related to orange, it was kind of, it's a little bit harder to define, especially just you don't see orange as much, and it's not as readily used in horror much. So it was hard for me to find some suggestions for the orange, but basically it most often represents like adventure, socialization, friendship, energy, excitement, which is not like very common emotions that we see in horror, so that must be why it's not really used as much, but it can give us feelings of warmth and optimism when it's used in film. And so it doesn't really scream horror to me, but surprisingly, it can still actually be effective at creating atmosphere, even in horror, which I found in some of these movies. I learned that surprisingly in horror that orange can give us almost the exact opposite effect as its typical emotions. And so in horror, when we see orange, it usually can give us a sense of like a barren landscape or desolation, isolation. And then the other like side to that is orange is obviously associated with Halloween and autumn and like spooky vibes. So we do see orange in horror themed things, maybe not something that's like super scary, but kids horror, that kind of stuff, we'll see orange. And you do see orange obviously in Halloween. There's like pumpkins all around, and so that makes sense. But maybe it's not making us feel
It's more
fear
like
really.
nostalgia. It like taps into nostalgia.
But we
I always think about that
yeah.
opening of Halloween, which I don't think gets talked about enough. The pumpkin and with the black backdrop, and how we get closer to the pumpkin, and then the light switches off, so the orange is replaced by blackness, basically. It's like we're gonna go into something which
Yeah.
is familiar and is nostalgic, but we'll see a darkness behind it. I feel like that's what it's saying.
Right. I do like that opening too. I agree. We don't talk about it enough, but I think it was a really
And so
effective
simple.
opening. I like that one. Um yeah, exactly. It's simple, but like you get the gist of what's happening just by something so simple. Which is, again, is kind of why I really enjoy a lot of like older horror films too, because there's so many things that it's like a simple thing, but you get what it's trying to tell you. You don't have to rely on crazy CGI and like scary images, which, just as a quick aside, I absolutely hated the remake of The Haunting because the original was so good, and the remake is
Yeah,
horrible. Like I just want to pretend it
it
never
was
was
like
made.
here's
So
this special effects film, which but the special effects were good. Like, can they be at least good if you're gonna make a whole film around them? No.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was like, I hadn't seen that remake before, but I watched it after watching the original one because, like, I a lot of times I like watching original things and then I just kind of like go through all the iterations of it just to be like, I've seen them all and to see the differences between them. And I was like, oh my God, who made this? Why'd they do this? But yeah, so the power of things being simple and understandable without having to interject crazy stuff. Sometimes it makes you feel more scared. I actually felt more, not super scared, but just more like unease in that original film that's black and white, like than seeing the weird CGI that was so
Mhm.
fake looking. It just totally brings you out of it. But yeah. So I think simplicity is good a lot of the time. Unless you're, you're really relying on jump scares and that kind of stuff to
Mhm.
get people scared. But also we see orange with like flames. And so in horror, you'll see orange a lot of times in like ritualistic type of scenes. A good example, which I literally just watched this movie last week, but
Mhm.
in The Witch at the end, there's like fire and flames, and you can see kind of like the orange glow like on her face and stuff. So and then also Hereditary, there's some orange in there, especially in the fireplace scene. And then another movie that I totally forgot about because it's been a couple years since I've seen it, but there's a movie
Mhm.
called His
I have,
House.
yeah.
I'm
It's an
not sure
interesting
if you've
one.
seen that one, but it's yeah, it was actually pretty. I was surprised at how I guess scary you could say it was, because I was not sure what was happening at first, but it was interesting because in that movie I believe all the orange tones were like flashback scenes, which like you said kind of can go along with like a nostalgia thing where we're thinking about the past and that it kind of gives it like an orange tint. And so, yeah, I thought that was interesting that to me, I was like, orange isn't really a horror thing, but when I dove deeper into it, I was like, I guess it actually does have some use in horror films. So yeah, and then I'll move on to yellow, and then again, I wasn't fully sure at the beginning of researching it how much yellow was going to come into it, because usually yellow is very like happy and joyful, optimistic, warmth and light, and it can represent hope, which it's not a very common feeling in horror films. An interesting thing that I learned was that the color yellow in horror kind of makes you perceive sickness and kind of plague and that kind of thing, a sickly feeling, and it also is linked to greed. So yellow, when it's more in a more aggressive way, kind of can give us like anxiety, and sometimes it represents like caution, like we see on like street signs and stuff like that. And actually, I noticed it in Suspiria, where yellow, there was a portion of the movie where the the directress was saying, "Oh, I want her to be sick or whatever," and then there's the yellow lighting on her face. So I felt like that was a good example of yellow representing sickness. And then another horror trope that I kind of forgot about until I was reading it was the basically like a child in like the yellow raincoat. So obviously we see that with Georgie and It, and even in like I don't know if you can, some people consider it kind of children's horror because it is kind of creepy, but also it can give us decay, and there's kind of a yellow tone in the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, with the decay and the torture scenes. So it definitely just gives us a uneasy feeling. Sometimes it's kind of like an unnatural, but yeah. So I think yellow can give us kind of like an unnatural lighting situation if it's overly yellow, maybe not like just a warm white. But next would be green. And so the psychology behind green is nature and calm and abundance, which again is those type of things are not really big in horror. But the other spectrum of green is sickliness and greed and jealousy. And so we see that version of green, I think, a lot more often in horror. So okay, so yeah, in green we see a lot of more so greed and sickliness when it's used in horror. But interestingly, even though it's tied with nature, which you usually wouldn't think of in horror, I kind of saw that green, when it's representing nature, can actually give us the danger of nature. So probably more so in films where people are stuck in the forest and stuff like that. Kind of like
and like the side of nature that's about rot
like
and decay.
dangerous nature, I guess
think
you could think
that
of.
kind of comes into the sickliness of it. Yeah.
Yeah, right, exactly. And so I was trying to find some examples for green, and so there's a movie called Green Room. I forget the director, but basically there's like the green overall tint of pretty much the whole movie, and it's exasperating the claustrophobia of being trapped in the room and then trapped in the house with the neo-Nazi people. And so that one, definitely I could see the green causing an uneasiness throughout the film, and obviously the film's pretty violent as well. And then Hereditary uses greens to remind us of the isolation and the growing dread as the movie goes on. And then there's also green in Suspiria as well. And then lastly, great example of like sickness with the green is Regan in The Exorcist, puking and all that, and that green very much makes you think of like sickliness. And the one other thing I was going to say is interesting about green is that even not in horror can bring up like kind of like evil poison, because they use green so much in Disney for villains and stuff like that. So I thought that was interesting to note as well. And then with blue's like kind of another color that keeps us feeling like a full range of emotions depending on like the context that we see it in. So usually with blue, it's like relaxation and calm and trust and wisdom. But on the other end of the spectrum, blue can also represent sadness and like depression and the cold. So again, kind of like red, it's like
it feels like blue would be a challenging one to get a like systematic read on in horror, because of course it's in there, right? But with odd exceptions like Blue Sunshine, I can't really think of like many films that use it quite centrally. I'm sure they must exist, but
yeah. I think the main one that came to my mind for blue is like the remake of The Ring, because I feel like the whole entire movie has like a blue like filter on it, basically. Yeah, exactly. And in that movie, it's like giving you very like uncanny, weird kind of feeling. It's interesting because since it's like it's based in the Pacific Northwest for that particular one. It's very obviously cold and gray and sad there anyways, with just the kind of typical weather pattern there. So it's interesting because it does give you the eerie feeling, but it also kind of like gives you the atmosphere of where it's located too. So like you said, that it's not necessarily like a central thing. But yeah, and so I also was thinking kind of darker blues we might see in horror because it's kind of like related to darkness and nighttime. And of course, in most of the movies, all the spooky stuff happens at night. So that was kind of the only really examples I could fully come up with. And then let's see. Oh yeah, another thing I kind of read about it was the interesting thing about blue is that besides really like the sky and say like the ocean and everything, blue is not typically a natural color in most other things. And so sometimes that can make us feel an uncanny feeling with blue, just because it's not, I guess, it's weird to say it's not natural because obviously
like food is
it's natural,
we
but
don't eat
like
a lot of blue
other
foods,
items.
right? Even blueberries are more
Right, yeah,
purple.
exactly. So it's like it feels unnatural maybe in a lighting sense. So like another example that I found, which I forgot about because it's been a while since I've watched it, but in The Conjuring 2, inside the house where the girl's possessed and everything like that, it's a very blue shade. And so when you're seeing a blue lighting, but it's within a building or a house, it's feels weird. And even like in Suspiria too, there's some blue, and it's not just like a cool toned white lighting, it's legitimately blue. So you're like, okay, this is weird. Very unnatural. Basically, I felt like in horror, blue is kind of more like cold and sadness and like a tragedy kind of feeling, and less of like what we usually feel with calm with blue. um, and so, an example again was in the Haunting of Hill House series. They used a lot of blue representing Nell kind of descending into like the depression and the tragedy and everything. I kind of forgot about that, but again, at that time I wasn't thinking about color while I was watching it. Um, so yeah, it's kind of like the sadness slowly overpowering her as the series goes on. I guess there's more blue
Oh,
as
I
it
wonder
goes
if you would
on.
find more
So,
blue where horror treads
yeah.
on melodrama, which of course it does frequently enough. I wonder if that would be an interesting thing to look
Yeah.
into.
Yeah, I definitely would be interested in looking deeper into that too, because it's not like you're saying with that kind of clash between melodrama and horror. It's not like you're in a abandoned insane asylum. Like it's not that type of movie. So, yeah. And then lastly, we'll just go over Purple real quick, and then we can talk about our movies. And so, Purple was kind of hard for me to find with horror, um, but we'll still go over it, obviously. But often we're associating Purple with like royalty and mystery and a whimsical kind of stuff, fantasy things, and so also imagination and creativity. So with purple and horror, I kind of had to like dig a little deeper with that. And since it's kind of similar to blue, it's sort of a rarity in nature besides like flowers, really. And so like if it is used, it definitely stands out to us in a frame. So an example that I found, again, wasn't thinking about it when I watched the movie last, but in Carrie, obviously we usually think about red with Carrie, but the scene when they're actually being a crowned prom king and queen, the scene was actually bathed in like a purple glow. And so it definitely drew our attention to that moment, but I was kind of thinking about it that when we think of purple with royalty, I was wondering if it was kind of like a subtle nod to the fact that they're like, prom king and queen. It's like a royalty thing. I don't know if that's a thing, but I just thought of it. I was like, kind of could be there. But also purple kind of has like an otherworldly nature, so I think it makes it perfect for like dream sequences, kind of more psychedelic themed sequences. And an example I found about that was in Vertigo. There's some purple hues when there's some dream sequence stuff. And then an interesting one was purple using being used for like femininity and innocence. And so in Mike Flanagan's example in The Haunting of Bly Manor, Flora and Danny are seen in purple often, which I guess is kind of representing their innocence and, you know, a tie to the original movie The Innocents. And so very quickly I was just going to go over a very simple explanation of Technicolor film, especially since they use that in Suspiria that we're going to talk about. So basically it's an early color film process known for its vivid and almost surreal saturation, especially popular in Hollywood from the 30s to the 50s. And it layered film strips to create rich, hyper-realistic colors that gave movies kind of a dreamlike or heightened quality, which I think definitely works well in Suspiria. And it's often obviously associated with musicals and fantasy films, and very popularly used in Wizard of Oz. But its influence is also felt in horror, and especially with films like Suspiria, and that's where the color becomes part of the atmosphere in dread, and it's not just like a visual thing, it's kind of emotional tied to the story. And so yeah, I had to like look up a very simple way to explain it.
The reasons why Technicolor was eventually phased out is that it was really expensive and really time and labor intensive. So when alternative techniques, which were simpler, yes, came around, eventually pretty much everybody converted to those, even though they maybe looked less good or didn't capture the same kind of look.
Right. I think I forget where I read this, but I think I was also reading it was very hard on the actors because I think they had to have a lot of light, and it was like hot lighting for the Technicolor to work correctly, I think. And so I forget what movie I was reading about, but they were saying that like on the film set it was like 100 degrees because of all the lighting. Yeah, that made it difficult for the actors. So first we're gonna talk about our movies. We're gonna talk about Suspiria first. And it's basically a movie that's well known for its color. It was directed by Dario Argento and it's kind of like considered a giallo film, I think. It does have some characteristics of giallo, so but I'm gonna go deeper into giallos later down the line in the podcast. But for all the listeners, all you need to know, it's basically like an Italian version of slashers, and many people consider it to be actually like a precursor to the slashers that we know today. But yeah, first I'll let you talk a bit about it, Murray, because I know you probably know more than I do about it since you did research about it and everything. I've just watched it a couple times, but I'll let you go into your thoughts on color and Suspiria.
Yeah, I mean, it is a rare film that I feel like you cannot think about without thinking about color. And you raised the thing about giallo, which I know there are some purists who say it's not giallo because it's not like a murder mystery, although it does have mild mystery elements to it, and it has kind of been lumped in improperly. And I'm not sure that I really have a dog in that in that race, but it is interesting that giallo means yellow, right? So there's already a color element. When you think about it, film noir and so on, there's so many colors we reference even in the names of genres or styles. And Suspiria is one of those films that if you watch it strictly for its plot, you're likely to be disappointed. It's kind of it's poorly plotted, really. Not a ton happens in it. It doesn't end very strongly.
Right.
It has a kind of sudden, precipitous ending. But if you take it purely as a mood piece on the level of style, and all elements of style, cinematography and sound and music, then it becomes this rapturous experience. It's one of those films that almost feels non-narrative. It feels like an extended music video for these experimental, Italian musicians, Goblin, and just the exercise of whatever Argento feels like throwing at the screen. Its premise, such as it is that this American ballerina has gone to train at this German dance studio, and it's secretly run by witches who secretly run the world, in fact. And this famous Italian architect has built this place along some kind of occult specifications, it's implied. But it's very strange because the architecture of the place is very odd, this sort of stark modernist aesthetic, and nobody seems to care or notice. And on top of that, the coloring of the film is so incredibly strange. There's
Yeah.
hardly a scene. In fact, there are a few scenes that are exceptions, which are interesting just for that reason. But, well, most light in films across the board is white. White light does not demand explanations. In Suspiria, it's every color except for white most of the time. The lights are red, or they're green, or they're pink, or they're gold, and sometimes you kind of lose track of what objects are even colored because so much weird light is just filling the environment all the time, and that's what you focus on instead. And it's to the extent that if you see conventionally colored objects in the film, it's important in some way. It's almost like an arrow pointing to this.
Right.
And the big example of that is the 3 colored flowers, which end up being kind of the secret, which I won't spoil all of that, but it leads to the third act of the film, basically, or not even the third act, but its immediate climax.
Right.
And you could drop the needle just about any place in the film and find something that looks incredibly strange and also distinctive. Like, it's instantly recognizable. There's no way this could be in any other film, really.
Right.
And there are a few scenes in the film which take place outdoors in like urban settings with kind of conventional white light, or natural light, presumably, and they look so odd in the context
Yeah.
of the film. So that's kind of the Suspiria experience. So to me, it's the ultimate example of color as intoxication, color as excess. Because I think one thing that we should remind ourselves is that film does not need color. It doesn't need sound either. Like, these things are technically excessive. They're supplements to what film needs, which is the image. There are some who would say, no, it doesn't even really need that. You can have a blank screen and that's still a film, which is
Right.
technically correct. But I think about Rudolf Arnheim, who was one of the great film theorists, and his position was always that film lost something when it started to add things like sound and color, because it had developed a representational language through movement, through gesture, and all of that kind of loss. And he was working from a theory of art that art is supposed to be unlike reality. So anything you add which becomes more like reality is necessarily less artistic. Now, I don't subscribe to that theory. I think that's a very kind of old-fashioned, rigid 19th century idea, basically.
Yeah.
But it is interesting because he always described color films as looking like unhealthy to him. That they looked sickly, and one thing you touched on before, which is really interesting, is that because Technicolor was so expensive, because it was only available to huge prestige productions in Hollywood at the beginning, it was reserved for things which aren't like reality, scenes of glamour or of fantasy. So even though we see colors in our phenomenal reality around us,
Right.
black and white gets coded as more realistic in film. And I think that still kind of sticks around, even, close to a century later, or at least a kind of desaturated brownie kind of aesthetic codes reality in horror films. Well, think of 28 Days Later or something like that. So, and of course, the Baroque excesses of Suspiria is the farthest you can get from that, where color is just it seems to kind of embody the magic and the supernatural of the film, and it's just there. It's just kind of diffused into the atmosphere, into the mechanism, if you like, of film form itself. You
Yeah.
kind of wonder sometimes if the colors are even diegetic, if they're even supposed to be there within the
Right.
narrative, because characters don't seem to acknowledge them or be aware of them, or
Right.
they sort of more along the lines of a film score where it's just for us. It's just for us
Right.
to experience. We're not really supposed to think of it as being real in a
Yeah.
narrative sense. So Suspiria is like the extreme example of that. And of course, this is something which horror is often very good at, forcing film to go beyond what it absolutely needs,
Right.
to embrace excess, to embrace intoxication. And it's something that has in common with the musical, of course. And I think the links between horror and the musical are something that should be developed a lot more than they have been. But Suspiria is a good example of that too, because there's sort of a backstage musical lurking kind of behind its narrative as well.
Right.
So those are some rambling thoughts on Suspiria just now.
Great. No, those are great thoughts. I think one thing that is interesting, kind of what you were talking about, is like there's certain things that are only for us to experience. And I hope I'm not gonna butcher it, but I remember learning in one of my classes that Alfred Hitchcock, I think it's called like The Bomb Under the Table, where the audience knows what's happening, but the people don't. It kind of reminded me of that, where it's like it's something that we understand is happening, or we see what's there, but the characters don't. It's not like that's not for them to know.
Yeah, another term for that is unrestricted narration, with
Okay.
those things which put us in a position superior to the audience, or
Right.
a position superior to the characters, rather.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting like concept. And again, like before kind of like diving myself into learning more about like film and stuff like that, it's just like never even thought about it. Didn't know that that
Hmm.
was kind of like a purposeful thing. But it's definitely an interesting, I think, concept in film and like storytelling.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I find that when teaching film in first year in particular is the biggest part of the job is to get them to think beyond the plot.
Right,
That it's like it's more than just what happens, but it's like, pardon me, it's how film form conveys those events.
right,
And I try to keep saying it's like film isn't necessarily narrative. Like
right.
there are kinds of films which aren't narrative. Music videos are a good example of that, of course.
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, it's so cool to understand. So there's so many different things that go into it that make what you actually experience what it is you experience. Like you said, not necessarily only the story and what happens in it, but atmosphere, music, color, like so many things go into the finished product. So I think it's so interesting just to even learn about all that stuff. Couple notes that I kind of wrote down while I was watching it, because I watched it again yesterday to have it fresh in my mind. Some of the things that stood out to me that made me think of like the giallos was that the red of the blood is very like not blood red. It's kind of
Hmm.
like almost reminds you of like paint, sort of, the viscosity of it. The other thing was that I was learning about in giallos that a big part of it is kind of like when there's the killer or whatever, you never see them, and it's just like a hand, or like a
Hmm.
black gloved hand.
The
And
Black Glove, yeah.
yeah, and that obviously it wasn't a black gloved hand in this one, but in the beginning, the first kind of death in the film, you're just seeing like the hand stabbing the
Hmm.
lady. And so that reminded me of a lot of the giallos that I've seen. And so that's why I was like, I could see the argument that it's a giallo, or maybe like a pseudo giallo a little bit. And some that another thing I thought was interesting in the color was that the very few scenes that have the naturalistic color that we were talking about were in the daytime, day scenes, um, and because the colors of the house, not the house, the building or whatever, and in the rooms, it's all the weird primary colors. But if it's like a daytime scene, maybe the characters are wearing just normal clothes. But as soon as you see that it's the lighting change, where the actual lighting is the weird colors, then it's like, okay, it's nighttime, and maybe it's alerting us to, okay, now we're in nighttime, now weird stuff is probably going to happen. Because I noticed some of the daytime scenes, maybe the lighting is actually natural, but obviously the environment colors are still weird.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I noticed that as I was watching it. And then another thing that I noticed was the set pieces. A lot of them kind of reminded me of the German expressionist sort of vibes, where the ceilings are weirdly tall or the windows are weird shapes. And I thought that in conjunction with the weird colors kind of makes you feel that weird, uncanny feeling. Another thing I just noted that we just talked about was that how like the characters, they're not uh reacting to like the fact that the room is all blue. They're just like living in the scene where we're like, okay, why is it blue? But they're like, oh, the lighting feels weird or anything. So I thought that was like you said, it's more for your experience of the actual film itself.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep, and that's all my notes from the movie, besides just like enjoying the crazy just aesthetics of the whole thing. So if you have any other thoughts about Suspiria, if not, we can move on to Mask of the Red Death, if that's cool with you.
Not really. It's always a film that I've enjoyed, and it's never a film that I've thought that I had particularly deep feelings about.
Right. It's
It,
kind
it,
of
it
just
just kind of
fun.
exists like an object, you know? Uh,
Yeah, perfect. That's kind of how I feel about it too. Like you said, it's not a very compelling story that you're like, oh my God, this is so great storytelling or anything, but
mhm.
it is a fun watch, absolutely.
It's just like a bunch of weird set pieces strung together,
Yeah,
and
totally.
yeah. Hmm.
And I did think the ending was very abrupt, like you said earlier. I was like, oh wait, that's the end? Like it ended? Okay. And
Yeah.
the
Well,
credits are rolling, and I was like, oh, okay.
it ends with a house burning down, which could
Right.
be a useful segue to Roger Corman's Poe films, almost all of which end that way, except for Mask of the Red Death for some
Yes,
reason.
exactly. Yeah, and I rewatched Mask of the Red Death this morning also to just like
Hmm.
get my mind back into the mode of it. And so for our listeners, the Mask of the Red Death, it was released in 1964, and as we just mentioned, it's directed by Roger Corman. And it famously stars Vincent Price, which who many consider, a horror icon actor wise, which I do too. I love him. I love him in all the movies I've seen him in. And so, and funny aside is I didn't know who he was when I very first watched Edward Scissorhands. It's one of my favorite movies. And when I finally figured out that like that was Vincent Price, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. So just a little aside there, but yeah, so the movie, it utilizes color throughout the story, special affinity for red, of course, and there's a lot of primary colors and just like highly saturated colors, which I think is kind of common in that era of filmmaking. But if you're thinking about it as a period piece, I don't really know how often everyone had those type of colors on. And I don't know what era it is, 1600s or 1700s,
It's kind of vague. It's kind of this. It's
just like medieval.
it has a vaguely Italian Renaissance vibe to it, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, I was trying to think of it when I was watching. I was like, I don't really know exactly which time period this is, but medieval, Renaissance, somewhere in
Hmm.
there. Um, so yeah, and also it's based on it's an Edgar Allan Poe short story. So
Hmm.
there you go for the viewers, a quick little history about it. And then I'll let you go into your thoughts on the movie.
Yeah, I really love this film, and it's probably my favorite of the Corman Poe films, of which there are 8 or 7, depending on what you count. Anyway, I don't want to get into the weeds on that right now. Um, and it's tends to be the one that people like the most, even though in a sense it's not the most representative. Um, and Corman or Price's character, and he's in all but one of them. He usually plays a kind of decadent, decaying aristocrat, and he sort of is that. But his Prince Prospero is weirdly kind of vital. Like this guy, he seems full of life for being incredibly evil. It's like
Right.
you have to kind of like this guy because he just seems so happy. You know, he
Right.
just seems so happy in everything that he does. Uh,
Very charismatic, for sure.
he is very charismatic, and feels like every line of dialogue is just like he just seems like he's having so much fun. And
Yeah.
every line is like keyed up as much as it possibly
Oh yeah.
as it possibly can.
I
And the
agree.
female lead is Jane Asher, who was best known at the time for dating Paul McCartney,
Oh,
and
nice.
she's okay. There's some kind of cringe-inducing moments. Her character is supposed to be so pure and virginal, you know, and it's like it's overdone a little bit. But
Yeah.
you know, she's a likable enough lead,
Yeah.
and the film looks really good on like a B movie budget. It's like the sets all look really impressive.
Right.
And it was shot in the UK, and Nicholas Roeg, future director of Walkabout and significantly for film color, Don't Look Now, was the cinematographer. So it just feels like a very firm hand guiding everything here, and that's what I've always really liked about that film. It is an interesting adaptation. I've never taught it as an adaptation, but it would be an interesting one because it's like the short story is very short,
Right.
and basically the third act of the film adapts the short story, and the first two acts are just here's some stuff we came up with
Yeah.
to
Totally.
fill this out. So what do you do when you're adapting a short story with very little plot? It's like, okay, a lot of people walking through hallways and dream sequences, and
Yes.
so we have all of that. All of the films have that. It becomes almost eerie when you watch them back to back, just how
Right.
similar they are to each other.
I'll
It
have to
it
do that.
it in a funny way it works. It's like a recurring nightmare or something where the
Yeah.
same plot beats just get hit again and again. And almost all of them end with a house burning down after the fall of the House of Usher, and they would reuse the same footage each time. So that becomes really
Okay.
funny if you watch them back to back. Um,
Okay, that looks familiar.
yeah, but that Mask of the Red Death does not end with that. So to get to color, so of course, red is in the title. Red Death is this fictional disease that makes you bleed from your skin, basically.
Right.
It's this terrible plague, and it struck the landscape, and these decadent aristocrats and a select number of peasants they brought with them, basically,
Yeah.
have walled themselves up to kind of keep them from the world outside. But of course, the whole point is, and this is the point of Poe's story, that you can't do that. Eventually, the things that you wall out will get in, and the Red Death is like a walking manifestation of the plague, who just eventually manifests as a party goer at this masked ball, basically, uh, and um, and so it keeps that, you know, and but what's interesting is the way that the film visualizes the Red Death in this very interesting costume where he's red from head to toe, but it's not quite what you'd expect. There's like fringe on it and stuff. It's
Right.
just a very interesting design,
Yeah, the fringe
and
was interesting. I thought that
yeah,
too.
and there are all these interesting shots of like him sweeping his arms, which are kind of draped in these robes, and
Right.
then they serve as like dissolves, and then that infects people, and they're transformed into plague victims afterwards. So
It's time for a new dance to begin. The dance of death.
there's something very cinematic about the way that the film chooses to visualize this. Apparently, Corman was not happy with the closing sequence, and I kind of understand. It is a little too stagey,
Right.
but I enjoy it.
Yeah.
I still like the way that it's done, and but it does. There's something oddly arty about the film. It's kind
Yeah.
of building on especially from Bergman's The Seventh Seal. It's kind of borrowing the DNA of that film
I was
a
actually
little
just
bit.
gonna mention that one. Yeah, it reminded me of
Yeah.
that a lot.
I mean, it's pretty unavoidable, really, but
Yeah.
I don't think it's just a copycat either. I think it merges the Bergman and the Poe and the Corman sensibility in really interesting ways.
Yeah.
And it looks great. And so another thing too is that all of the Poe films have, not quite all, but most of them have nightmare sequences with weird color tints on them. Nightmare sequences or hallucinations, or in this case, when a character sells her soul to the devil, and then we get this like incredibly indulgent torture sequence of like greedy bluey demons whipping her over and over again. And it proves almost completely narratively inconsequential because this happens and then she gets killed like right after.
Yeah.
And Prince Prospero quipped something like, "She's just married a friend of mine."
I know that one. You delivered that line so like it was perfect.
Yeah. Uh, so the kind of intoxicating thing with color is excess and color is dream and hallucination. The whole films including this one, all contain really, really strong examples of that, where it's like this is an extreme case of everything stops. We just kind of watch this color thing going on, and and color is used to mark it as different from the film around it, in a very unmistakable way.
Yeah.
Boy, I could go on. It's just such a great film. I just really love this film. I remember like a woman who I was dating when I was about 18. I had her watch it and she wasn't into it, and I was like, I
Yeah.
don't know if this is gonna last. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like a shibboleth or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, I I recommend all the Poe films. Like some of the others are quite good. Tomb of Ligeia is very good, and Fall of the House of Usher is beautiful in its own way. But in that one feels austere rather than feeling excessive. It feels like there's something very, very slow about it, and like this kind of oppressive weight of illness kind of bearing down on it. And even though The Mask of the Red Death is literally about illness, it actually feels much more lively and upbeat of the film. Yeah, it is a weird one, totally. I don't know. Had you seen it before?
I hadn't seen it before, so this was my first. I watched it twice in the last couple of days, so it was my first time like watching. Because first I watched to just experience it and enjoy it, and then second I was like, all right, I'm gonna like look a little bit more at the color and everything. But I loved it, and I think it was like a lot of time I try to go into movies not knowing anything, so I don't have things in the back of my head as I'm watching. So I didn't fully know what it was about, and then I didn't think that Prospero was completely evil at first. And then it kind of felt like as it went on, he was like, okay, he's getting more and more evil. But like you said, he's so charismatic. I'm like, is he being evil or like he's not like scary evil? I don't know, you know? So, but I really loved it.
You almost root for him. It is strange.
It's weird. You're like, I kind of like his character, but he is killing people and telling them like you can't come into my party because then you're gonna give us the Red Death and all this stuff. So it's like he's happily evil.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, I think he plays that type of character well because another one I recently watched was Witchfinder General, and
Yeah.
again, he's sort of charismatic in it, but then he's like super evil. So you just can't tell. Do you like him or not?
Yeah, Witchfinder General is an interesting one because he's like unusually low key in that one.
Yeah, compared
It
to
isn't
other
so
ones,
much.
for sure.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah,
It
I
isn't
can
so
see
tongue
that.
in cheek, you know. It isn't so camp.
Right.
It's like, yeah. Um, but he was an interesting figure. I mean, a lot has been written about him from queer studies as well as a sort of, I think, male diva
Mhm.
kind of character.
Totally.
Yeah, and so there's a lot that was interesting about him. He was sort of he like collected art. He was sort of an aesthete in real life and
Right.
had cookbooks and stuff like
Yeah.
that. You know, seemingly like just kind of somebody who did it all.
Right.
But he's just such a fun screen presence. I'm not sure if there is a modern equivalent, to be entirely honest.
I don't think there is.
In the remake of of A House on Haunted Hill, they use Jeffrey Rush as the and he's kind of doing a Vincent Price thing with the
Yeah.
look and everything, and it kind of works.
And I think
But
as a nod to him, I think his last name, the character's last name, I think is Price, maybe.
yeah,
I
I think you
forget.
may be right.
There's
It's been a long time,
some
but
sort of
yeah,
connection. Yeah, I haven't watched it in a while, but yeah, he was kind of trying to be like a modern Vincent, I think. But
yeah, yeah.
you can't fully ever be him, obviously. But he did an okay job. I like the original better, but I did like that remake. It wasn't terrible. It was obviously different, but it was still enjoyable to watch, I think.
Yeah, it was kind of okay.
Yeah.
As I recall, I probably hadn't seen it since it came out, to be honest. But
Yeah, it's kind of I forget when it came. I think it was like what, maybe late 90s or early 2000s. So it
right
definitely
around then, I
had
think. Yeah.
that kind of, I feel like most movies in that time, they had a very similar kind of vibe. I feel like a lot of movies in that time frame, they had a lot of the same haunted insane asylum like
Yeah.
backstories. I think there was a lot of that during that time period. So I was like, okay, it's not the best, but it definitely has the vibes of the times that it came out. So I was like, I'll just give it the benefit
Mhm.
of the doubt for that. Yeah, that's kind of all. I mean, I was trying to kind of think of like symbolism in terms of Mask of the Red Death, but I was having a hard time with, if any colors really meant anything specific besides red in that one. Because I mean, there's all the different rooms, and I read a lot of
Mhm.
theories on it, but I guess it didn't read to me while I was watching it. But I think I read that there was one theory that all the different rooms are the different phases of your life, and then you get to the end where there's like the black and the red room, and that's kind of like
Mhm.
death. So I thought that was an interesting theory on it. Do you have any thoughts or theories on the different colored rooms, or if they had any
Well,
type of significance?
I guess I kind of just wonder, like, do they need to be interpreted, or same thing in Suspiria? Can colors
Yeah,
not exist for their own sake? You know,
right,
can is that not sufficient? Uh,
right,
in fact, the idea of something that exists apart from intellectualization, that can be a very scary idea, an idea
right.
which horror will often play with. A lot of body horror deals with that,
Oh,
right?
yeah,
These
absolutely.
are the things which escape signification. They're just like, which the body is maybe the ultimate example of that. Like,
Right,
bodies ultimately don't necessarily need to represent anything; they just are,
right,
and that's why they can't be controlled entirely. And I think color sort of works like that. I think that this is where the idea of chromophobia of David Batchelor's weird book comes back in, and he says, like, we want to contain color within schemas,
right,
that this is what colors mean, and this is what they represent, and so on, because they're dangerous, because they represent something that kind of goes beyond our capacity to contain. And I think that's something that horror, and I think that's what Poe was playing with, and I think it's what Lovecraft was playing with in The Color Out of Space.
yeah,
And it's many adaptations are interesting, and the degree to which it tries to represent that, and how is it going to represent? How do you represent a color which is unrepresentable?
exactly.
Um, and I think all these works kind of play with this in different ways.
I agree. I think because as you said, when I watched the film, obviously red has a more obvious what it means in the movie, but the other colors, like the theory of all the different rooms and different parts of your life and stuff, when I watched it, that didn't come to my mind. So,
Hmm.
like you were saying, I was kind of thinking, maybe the colors aren't necessarily like blue means this, the yellow one means this. It just is that there's an uncanniness that there's weird colors that are not natural that you wouldn't expect to be there.
Well, and he has the monologue about the guy who was imprisoned in the yellow room and went
Oh,
insane
right.
and
Yeah.
couldn't bear to look at the sun. And it's like sort of about like inverting the meanings of color, that even a
Right.
color as comforting as yellow, he couldn't even look at a daffodil, we're
Right.
told. Even the comforting colors can become horrific under the
Right.
right circumstances, which does seem to. Now that I think about it, it's like it seems to be an explicit statement that colors don't mean anything in themselves.
Right.
They can be made to mean different things under other circumstances, even if it requires sort of extreme one.
Right.
Yeah, and I always try to get people to think of, significances other than symbolism
Right.
first. And of course, some things are symbolic, right?
Yeah,
Of course, that's
exactly.
true. But I think that the way that people get trained in art appreciation and literary appreciation and so on, it's like it's often the symbol hunt, and
Right.
I don't tend to think of the symbol hunt as the most useful way of doing
Exactly.
critical analysis. It's you can get there, sure,
Right.
but it's very easy to use that to kind of impose something rather
Right.
than looking at what's literally in front of you.
Exactly. And I always just think of it as, everybody has their own interpretation of things too. So how could you say that, maybe this color only means this and this is the only thing it could possibly mean in this painting or film or anything? Because, everything's subjective to everybody. So
Hmm.
it's hard to say unless, the director literally tells you, hey, by the way, this color means this, literally.
Well, yeah, and in Mask of the Red Death, I mean, in Poe and Corman alike, it's like it's death isn't black anymore. Now it's red
Right.
instead. Like that's literally what's being done here, and it's sort of richer and warmer, something like that. And
Right.
and so our specter of death is draped in red
Right.
rather than being like the Grim Reaper in black, and that's interesting.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Well, I think that's all I really had. And I just want to thank you so much for chatting with me. I know our chat went way longer than originally
Well,
planned.
that's okay. I'll live.
Yeah,
Hmm.
but I really appreciate you chatting with me and going over color. It's just such an interesting concept. I'm sure we could talk about it for many more hours if we had
It's
time,
true.
but
It's true.
um, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I hope to have you again in the future. For the listeners, if there is there any type of thing if they want to kind of like follow what you have going on, or if you have like new books coming out or anything like that, like any type of Instagram or just
Yeah, so,
that you'd like for people to follow.
the most reliable place. Well, I'm on BlueSky. You can do BlueSky, and also Academia.edu. A lot of my publications are up there, so if people
Great.
want to look at that, that might be the easiest way. And
Perfect.
I'm co-editing a collection on Indigenous horror, which should be out in about a
Ooh.
year, but I don't have a date yet.
Okay, well, that sounds very interesting. I'm gonna be looking forward to when that comes out.
Hmm.
But yeah, thank you so, so much. I appreciate it, and I hope to have another chat with you soon.
I do as well. Oh,
Great. Thank you
thanks
so
very much.
much. Alright, guys, that's it for my chat with Murray Leader on color psychology in horror films. What did you guys think? There's so much to unpack, so I want to know what your guys' thoughts are. And also, what did you think about the movie suggestions or examples that I put forth about movies with different color schemes, color palettes? Are there any that I didn't think of or that I didn't add? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Like, what's a good, well, there's plenty of movies for red, but what's a good horror movie with orange as the color palette? What's a good horror movie with purple as the color palette? I'd like to know. Let me know, guys. I want to hear your suggestions. It was a super fun talk. Murray is such a great guy. He's so, he's so knowledgeable. And so I'm hoping to have him back pretty soon. So you guys are going to see him again. Don't worry. But definitely let me know in the comments below what you thought of our talk. And if there's anything you want me to ask him, I can go ahead and ask him. Let me know. Keep a lookout for next week's episode where we're going to be talking about sound design in horror films. We're going to talk about sound effects and we're going to talk about score. And the really cool thing about it is my guest is Disaster Piece, or my friend Rich, who actually did the sound design or was a big part of the sound design for the movie It Follows. If you've seen It Follows, you know that the sound design and the score is just very eerie. It's amazing. It creates a vibe. And so I'm excited to have him with me, and we're going to talk all things sound design and his experience creating the sound design for It Follows. So definitely tune into that episode. It's going to be great. And as always, thanks for keeping it real with me. See ya.